Well, hello YouTubers, and welcome back to the Host Mitchell channel and this second episode of Hot Shop Tips. Today we're deburring some wooden parts that were made here on the Bridgeport. And the interesting thing, let me back up here. Sometimes when you make parts out of hardwood, in some softwoods you can get burrs on the edges, and they can be kind of a pain in the ass to take off, especially if you're trying to use a file or sandpaper or rasp or something like that. Then you end up with a bevel on there that you really don't want. So one of the things you can use to get these burrs off without creating a big bevel, or you'll still get a little bit of a bevel, but not quite that dramatic, is using one of these utility knives. You can also use an old planer knife if you have it, or some people also prefer those flat metal scrapers. Those work really well as well if they're nice and sharp. So let me find a nice example here of a part that has a pretty nasty burr, and we'll zoom you in here on how well this works. Now, the one thing you're not going to do is you're not going to use the cutting edge in the traditional sense. You're going to scrape across it at a negative rake, which doesn't take off a chip as such. It just separates the fibers that are on the edge. So let me bring the camera around here and we'll zoom in, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now here we've got a nice nasty burr here. This one's actually kind of torn into the end of it a little bit, but nevertheless this is a good candidate for demonstrating the technique here. The one thing about using, say, the Bridgeport for making these parts, what I did is I put them in the vise here and then used the face mill with its helical flutes to cut across the grain. Normally when you do that with a router bit, you get burn, and you get, especially this on the edge, if you don't use a sacrificial piece. I didn't use a sacrificial piece here, so I just kind of plugged it in there. This was the second go around. If you climb mill, this actually goes away, at least to this extent. It doesn't look like this, where you have all this nastiness. So here's the tool that I was using to cut the end grain on here. As you can see, helical flutes. This causes the chip to be raised up over a longer area. You get nice, fluffy, curly, thin chips. The one thing you make sure of when you're using a bit like this on a Bridgeport, that it's sharp, freshly sharpened. Even if you buy a new bit, sometimes they're not quite as sharp as they should be. So you definitely want to, if you got a sharpening service that's any kind of decent, throw on a freshly sharpened bit and then run it at the highest RPM that you can. This one runs at 2300 RPM max. For this bit, in steel it would just kill it, but for wood it's actually a little bit too slow. This bit would need to run somewhere around 4,000 to 6,000 RPM to do it any justice on longitudinal grain. Cross grain, this speed is adequate enough to where it doesn't actually burn the wood. So let me see if I can get this in here. So when you get back in frame, I'm watching this and trying to so let's so when you use a negative rake angle, you're just essentially like I said, this has been chipped out here on the edge. I've got another one here that is also a good example. But then you go all the way around and you just kind of over exaggerated at about a 30 degree, roughly 25 to 30 degree angle. You just kind of take off the small burr that's on this. Now sometimes these burrs are sharp enough, especially in hardwoods, that they can cut you. So that's why this is, you know, like this edge right here, this will cut you. It's that sharp. I don't want to remove that burr just yet. Well, it's not a burr, but this sharp edge. But here we got a slight burr all the way around, and so just take that off like that. Now if you hold your knife relatively flat to that and then put that negative rake on there, that'll get the burr off there nice and clean, and then you don't have that burr on there. And if you have to reach in there a little flatter yet to get, you know, further in on the surface, because these burrs, these slivers will raise up, you can just turn it around. But as you can see, the bevel on here is so minimal, you can't even really talk of a bevel here. Again, we got a nice big fat burr here. You can't really see it on the camera, but that's all there is to it. Well, YouTubers, that's a wrap for the second episode of Hot Shop Tips. And there'll be more of these kind of things coming up. These are just short little shop videos that kind of, you know, help a guy out a little bit here and there. You know, little, not shortcuts, but things that make life a little more bearable. So if you ever have to do work like this with hardwood, this is a good way of going. You know, I tried it with a file here to deburr, and didn't work so hot, at least not to my liking. Anyway, that's a wrap for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it, got something out of it, and we hope to see you guys all again very soon.